Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the OKR Q&A Podcast, also known as the OKR Corral, where OKR Insight is the king. I'm your host, Tim Meinhardt, CEO of Atruity, an OKR consultancy headquartered in our nation's capital. I'm so excited for today's program as we get a chance to spend some time with Mike Byrd. Mike has an MBA from Southern Methodist University's Cox School of Business, but his true loyalty lies with his Baylor Bears. Currently, he's Red Hat's Vice President for the U.S. Public Sector and Channel Sales. Over the last 18 months, I've had the pleasure of working with Mike and his extraordinary team as they embarked on the OKR journey. Trust me, you will thoroughly enjoy our discussion. Everyone, please welcome Mike Byrd. Mike, welcome to the program. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
How are we doing? You feeling good? I know we were just chatting about vacation, so always nice to be on vacation. And
nice to hop on a podcast to talk about my familiarity and comfort with OKRs right after vacation. But,
terrific.
It's OKRs to help me go on vacation, not be so sweaty and nervous when I come back.
I love it. So, Mike, tell the audience a little bit about yourself as we get started.
I've been at Red Hat now about a little over 15 years, about 9.5 years at Sun Microsystems before that. So I've been in the public sector IT space most of my career, even though a lot of my time at Sun I was selling both commercially and in the public sector space. Always sales, the back 2/3 of my career in the channel. I was born and raised in Texas, moved to Virginia, D.C. a long time ago, so I've kind of become a Virginia, D.C. guy. Hard to imagine that, but got my family here in Northern Virginia, and we're having a great time, and the kids are getting old enough to, become independent little people and start doing their own things, and they're still in elementary school, but that's a big, fun part of my life.
Terrific. I see the Baylor University shirt on today, too, so...
Well, I'm a Baylor guy, starting from Texas. I tell you what, I may have lost a lot of my Baylor roots being in this area for over 20 years now, but I have not lost any of my Baylor fanaticism. It's just as strong as it ever was, maybe even stronger. Perhaps.
I love it. That's fantastic. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about your initial impressions with objectives and key results.
Oh, yeah, goodness, that's funny. We as a team, Paul's leadership team, Paul's my boss. I don't know how much context I have for the audience listening, if it's a Red Hat audience or if it's broader than that, but Paul Smith, my boss, he talked about OKRs. He asked his leadership team, he asked us to read a book called Measure What Matters. Author's name escapes me, but I know he was one of the leaders of the investment group that helped create Google into the monster that it is today. And I read that book, and I have to say the first third of the book was exhilarating and this is really cool stuff. The final 2/3 got a little dry and boring, and lots of stories of individual use cases of OKRs, and it sounded hard. It sounded like extra work from what I was already doing. And I have to say I was a little negative on it. I thought, it's just yet another new corporate initiative for me to do. I'm not really keen on that. But then we had a group session where we all got together. We brought on a kind of a facilitator from one of our business units within the company, and she had been experienced in kind of working within OKRs for several years, kind of became a leader within the business unit. And she guided us through it, and I began to warm a little to it because I thought, maybe some of the things that I'm doing that are not good enough as a manager, mostly as a manager, I just draw distinctions between a manager and a leader, but I thought maybe some of the things I was deficient in as a manager, maybe these OKRs could help me out. So it kind of piqued my interest at that point. That kind of began my personal, internal embrace of OKRs. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit as to my early exposure.
Yeah.
But I have to say I was not a fan initially, but over time it won me over. And now, as a still learning but much more experienced manager than I was initially, I have found that OKRs have made me a colossally better manager. And it's been a really great tool to just make me look better.
Really?
To make our team work better.
That's terrific. What aspects, Mike, do you think are there that you would say, hey, I've become a better manager because of this?
One of the things I think I can do for my team, especially it's a fairly large team, we have over 100 people now in the organization. Things can get complicated. Red Hat, we're not a one product company anymore. We got a lot of different products. We compete in a lot of different markets, and it can be a challenge to know what is the most important thing to do for my day. Because in my organization, everyone on my team could easily become just completely reactive and chase action items that others put on them. And that would just create a mess. We'd have no strategic vision. In fact, I felt that way sometimes. Excuse me. But OKRs really, they stem from our strategic vision. And we are able to set for every member of the team just a few things. If you know these three things, if you do these 2 or 3 things today, you will have been successful by the end of the day. And we, of course, do those out by quarter now, and then we extend them out annually if we're doing a really good job of them. And we're still getting better. I think we've got a long ways to go to be masters. But to me, the number one value prop is it sets a clear list of priorities that I know if I've got to chase a lot of different things, if I got to be responsive or if I'm going to be proactive, what do I need to do to answer these few simple questions that my management team is asking of me? And in the Red Hat way, OKRs are also a bottoms up as well as a top down kind of conversation.
Oh, absolutely, Mike. And your organization has been terrific with these. Walk us through a little bit about what you think your biggest challenge was when you actually got started with the OKR program.
The biggest challenge for me, I would say, was first off the personal adoption of these. I touched on that a little bit already because I viewed it as additional work. But in truth, I think the metamorphosis that I went through of viewing OKRs not as additional work, additional labor that I had to kind of go through, but I made it my work. And I had some existing processes, and I integrated it. I integrated the OKR process into my existing management structure that I created. A slight alteration and customization, hopefully, and some people are purists and they don't like it when you do that. Or at least for my purposes, that integration, which I believe I did adopt mostly OKR, but I still had some of my own personal structure that I created. That was probably the biggest change initially, me going through that personal metamorphosis, as well as all of my managers, getting them to go through that metamorphosis. I had a couple that were on board the moment I mentioned it. I had several, as you know, that were totally opposed, that dug their heels in and said, we're not doing this. Because I think they probably viewed it a little bit the same way I did. This is just yet another bureaucratic thing for me to do. I don't need that. I just want to get the job done. Because sometimes, and this is a real challenge, especially for us, Red Hat and the public sector leadership team. We are a long-term leadership team. We've been around for a long time here. Yeah. Most of us 10 plus years, and some of us have been around since we were a startup. And when you're a startup, OKRs are probably really critically important. But also, we didn't use them initially. We used our gut instincts to drive a lot of decision making, which our guts were generally right. But eventually, you can't trust your gut, and we need to make data-driven decisions. And this is what enables us to make those data-driven decisions. So it's I think, difficult for some people to go through that movement from that startup mode to maybe kind of a more data-driven kind of operational model, even though OKRs were really created with the startup in mind.
Right.
Hopefully that's a question.
Well, no, absolutely, Mike. And in fact, having worked with your group now for, a year and a half, if not longer, your team especially, from where we started, which we did have naysayers and folks that were not into it, to have everybody kind of turn around and embrace this has been truly unique. And it happened relatively quickly. All right, so we'll move into the segue to the next question here. Biggest success story with OKRs, Mike?
It's funny. Right off hand, I can think of a program that we've launched to drive lead generation and pipeline within our mid-market SLED territories. And so it's still a work in progress, so I can't jump onto it. But that particular program is driven by really creating 3 fundamental goals and objectives for the organization that we really follow through rigidly. And I don't know if I had done a good enough job moving from manager to leader here. I don't know if I had done a good enough job as a leader emphasizing how important my entire organization's role was in the creation of pipeline was. And so this is a really kind of high level concept here for us, but when we really began to use OKRs at its best, I think it helped me communicate that importance all the way down to every individual contributor in the organization. And now I would bet, I really was very confident that you would go, if I've got 100 plus people on my team, roughly 100, which is the number, you could probably get 98 of them to tell you without question, our number one priority is creation of pipeline. We have other objectives that we're facing, but pipeline is number one. I think it's really great when you can get everyone in an organization to understand what those top things are. I bet they could probably name all three. But just to have them know that about pipeline. And then that's kind of the high level thing. The next level thing there is that we have now created, because we've been asking this question of each other constantly through the OKR process, we have now really refined our pipeline creation process. We've asked so many questions and answered so many questions that we have really brought this thing into a kind of a science for us. We know what levers we can pull, what dials we can turn in order to generate more pipeline. We know what's going to create less quality pipeline, what's going to create higher quality pipeline. We're tracking new questions. Mm-hmm. This is kind of one of those keep an eye on type concepts within OKRs that have become really important because we now know, like, oh, wow, what's our conversion rate? What's our conversion rate within a certain time period? So it allows us to ask even more questions. And the good news, bad news is you never really know an answer. It just, you know a lot more questions. And it's allowed us to, instead of staying at a very high level, oh gosh, I need pipeline, that's a pretty general topic. But now we understand the uniqueness of the shape of our pipeline. And I'm getting into concepts and terms that the listener here may not really be all that comfortable with, but we really analyze our pipeline in a funnel and its shape and how mature it is. And when it gets out of shape a little bit, we look 4 quarters out, we look 1 quarter in, we look further, all different time frames and product cycles and customer cycles. It opens up a whole new arena of questions that would never have come up to us if we had continued on the path we were on before.
Yeah. Mike, and being in a lot of those meetings with your team, the focus that you mentioned before, the absolute focus and alignment of your entire team, I just find it exhilarating, to be honest with you. What advice would you give any organization that is considering or possibly looking at objectives and key results?
There's probably 2 things that jump out right away. Number one is to have facilitation, a third party to help you through the process. That could be someone like you, and you've been great for us. It could be an internal champion like we initially had. I wish I could remember her name. She was great. She was
Jen Krieger. It was Jen Krieger.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. But to have kind of an external person to kind of help you through the process, that is helpful. Because I will say initially some of my stumbling blocks were that I was really comfortable with my language of work in my world, but I was really uncomfortable with OKRs. And I think that it requires fluency in both languages, so to speak, in order to really adopt it well. And at the outset, I'm not going to be fluent in that language. Right. And I will make a lot of mistakes, and I will speak the language improperly. I won't use the right grammar, so to speak. And so having that, someone to kind of look over your shoulder, and then over time, I feel like I get comfortable and then I'm okay. So that is one of the biggest things, having the third party person to look over your shoulder. That's probably recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2 is to be willing to kind of step out of your job. Go outside. I'm speaking metaphorically here. Go outside of your job and then walk back into your job with a fresh perspective and a willingness to embrace OKRs. Because if there's not a willingness to embrace it, it won't